Governor Mark Gordon is on the phone with us. Mark, good morning. Good to hear from you again. We've been talking a lot lately.
Good
There
morning.
you are. He picked
Yeah.
up. Okay. so, so now that we have you on the phone, before we get into what we have to talk about today, which is, of course, education, I got to get this out of the way. Cheyenne Frontier Days. Who shut that down?
Well, you know those 5 rodeos, the deal, we never issued an order that said don't shut the rodeos down. I said with all those groups that I'd stand with them. We do it together. That's the Wyoming way. I'm in a position where you take most of the arrows. I'm willing to take some of those arrows, but we weren't the ones that closed down rodeos. People looked at like the Central Fair, Wyoming Fair and Rodeo, and made decisions because each of these rodeos has to make a profit, and some of the challenges that the COVID brings, like how do you keep a carnival sanitized? How do you make a night show so that it's safely socially distanced? Things like that. Those are difficult. We've been working on these issues for several weeks. And those rodeo committees came together. We talked to the PRCA, and they ultimately, each individual rodeo committee made their own decisions. We're responsible, I think, for parts of the order that made some of that challenging. I think a lot of these shows, they need to do stock contracting. They need to make sure the contestants get signed up. We were trying to figure out how to work with schedules and all that sort of stuff, but in the end, it was kind of all of us in that decision right then. And we'll still stand ready to work with any rodeo that wants to. It was early on that I realized that these bigger shows were going to really have a difficult time pulling things together. I said the state would stand behind them regardless of whatever their decisions were, and we will continue to do that. But we have been working on making sure that we get rodeos out there. Hewlett Rodeo's coming up. It's ready to go. I'm committed to making sure that county fairs, and of course for the Central Wyoming Rodeo, that's going to be a little bit challenging. But we've been working. First Lady's been working with 4-H and others to make sure these, the auctions and the shows go off right. We're committed to making sure our state fair is a premier event.
All right. Well, let's make sure we move into education quickly here because we only have you for a limited time. I suppose we're going to have a special session, and if so, we're going to have to consider the education budget, which was already in trouble.
You bet. You really go right across the board on education. You've got the community colleges, you've got the university, you've got K-12. And I think the legislature is going to have to wrestle with the appropriations that are associated with that. And I know that there's going to be a lot of turmoil and challenge and heart-wrenching decisions that are going to have to be made. We're going to be helpful as best we can to try to make a couple of suggestions. The superintendent and our offices have been working to try to figure out how to make these things happen.
Well, Governor, good morning, and thanks for being with us again. I know that a lot is in flux right now, but you talk about some of those painful decisions. What might some of those suggestions that you've discussed with Superintendent Balow be?
Well, I think there are a couple of considerations you have to put as a context in it, just sort of level setting going forward, and one of them is how do we have a safe environment. This year we put everybody online. We'll try to figure out ways that we can make that process better and work better. But we also know, and we've had this all the way through all the grades, that it's important to have the experience in the brick and mortar school too. So are we going to be back partial groups or full groups? We had asked, and I think I mentioned last time I was on, we'd asked every school district to anticipate being able to come back into school in the last 2 weeks of this year, just to sort of have a starting point of what we needed to do for this coming year. Not that many did that. But I do think the recalibration process course, that's a little bit out of our hands. That's going to have a lot to play in just what the costs of education are and what the expectations are. I think there may be questions about how much travel we do. There may be questions about how long a bus has to run. There may be questions about whether we need all the districts that we have. Pretty much everything's on the table.
You talk, Governor, about improving the distance education. From your perspective, what are some of the biggest issues, some of the biggest hurdles as far as implementing that? What are some of those things you want to try and improve moving forward?
Well, obviously, I think technology is one of the most important pieces of that. Do we have throughout the state the right amount of broadband access? What's it going to take to build that out? How do we fund it when we decide to do that? All of those questions. But in addition to that, and we talked a lot about this with the university yesterday, it's a whole different teaching discipline than teaching in a classroom. It's harder to get the sense of the feedback. I've had this experience. First Lady had this experience of, reading to a first grade class, and it's hard to keep everyone's attention when it's just on a little screen and you're at a distance. And so I think there's a lot of evolution that we're going to have to go through with education, and we're just starting to work on that.
In terms of addressing some of the issues with state revenue as it pertains to education, funding schools and educators, how do you think the legislature is going to be tackling that? What would you suggest to them in terms of making sure that we can maintain the level of education for students in Wyoming and not, in fact, make cuts? Or do you anticipate cuts?
Well, Nick, I think you're talking about quality and maintaining the quality of education, and I think if we take that as a touchstone, that's where I hope the conversation evolves. Not just how do we lop off an arm here or a leg there, but how do we maintain the quality? And now, when we talk about what that quality is, how do we deliver it in a more cost-effective, cost-efficient way? And I know that there are, the legislature, you've watched it, there are champions and there are detractors, and I'm sure they'll go at it tooth and nail. But in the end, what I'm going to focus on is making sure that the quality of our educational offerings are there, and if there are ways that we can extend the life of our assets, that's something that I want to make sure we do. That does mean maybe that there's more of and we did this over the last couple of years. We put in a really robust system to be able to analyze what facilities need attention, what the maintenance costs are going to be, so that we aren't just building things to build things, but we are really looking at what's the most cost-efficient way to provide that education.
Conserve some of that construction funding, yes, sir.
Yeah, well, and Governor, on that note, you're going to have to probably consider reaching, I would think, into the rainy day fund in order to keep the budgets up to where they need to be in order to do what we have to do.
Well, yeah, and Glenn, that's a really good point. I mean, that's why that rainy day fund is there. I'm very conservative, and so, I don't think you spend it all in 1 year. The rainstorm could last a couple of years. You look at the economic projections, it's pretty much alphabet soup. Is it an L? Is it a W? Is it a U? Is it a V? What kind of recovery are we going to see? And so I think we've got to keep a little bit of our powder dry, which does mean that we can't just fund everything. It means that we've got to be very, very thoughtful about how we use parts of that rainy day fund. And that's, we're talking about what we're doing with the health department. We're talking about what we do with senior care. We're talking about what we do with, food programs, all of those things. I think if you heard Don Richards, you could wipe out the entire staff of the state, not have anybody here, and it wouldn't touch this issue. So there's serious things to be considering here.
And with all that stuff on the table, it sounds like another special session of the legislature is more and more an option.
Yeah, I think they're pretty ready to do that. But what we asked them to do, they did for the most part. We needed the ability to be flexible in addressing many of the challenges that are coming. There were a lot of businesses that were not eligible for the PPP program. that loan program, the small sole proprietorships, some of our larger energy companies because of the requirements around it. And the point I made is if we have unemployed people, they are employed. They don't care, unemployed. They don't care if they work here or there. They're unemployed, and we need to be able to make sure that employment comes back. And like with the Central Wyoming Fair and Rodeo, Cheyenne Frontier Days, Sheridan Wyo Rodeo, Cody Stampede, we need to be able to support those so that they are still strong entities in those communities.
Certainly. What exactly, just for folks who might not have had the recap, what did the legislature accomplish in the most recent special session?
Well, they did 3 bills. One was an authorization to use the CARES Act money more broadly, so that WCDA, for example, is standing up a program to help with people who, renters, people who are facing foreclosure, but doing it not the way some have done, which is just nobody has to pay anything. We wanted to make sure that landlords, tenants, and new home purchasers were made whole. So the WCDA, we allowed for a program to be developed there that'll help support people that have real difficulty finding how to pay the rent. We have 4 new programs, economic development, that are designed to get dollars out the door to help with lost revenues for small restaurants, little businesses where they had to change because of the restrictions that were in place. We put a new program in that's going to allow some of these businesses to get assistance to get the PPE they need to be able to continue their businesses. We also looked at a liability change that if you're respecting the state's health care orders with COVID-19, you're exempt from liability. And then we also extended the work share program. So if I'm an employer and I have somebody who's working 40 hours a week, but I can't afford to pay them now 40 hours a week, and I reduce their hours to 30, we can make up that difference in this interim. So those were some of the programs that this bill allowed. These 3 bills allowed.
I want to make sure to end this because I got to let you go. But on a more personal note, the governor's office is a long day and a long week anyway. Now we're in this situation. So you getting a break? You doing any fishing?
Glenn, I went up home and we have 3 bunches of calves that were in 3 different places, and I got to do that, and it was just nice to have a little bit of a break. So thank you very much. I hope everybody had a good Memorial Day.
Oh, yes. It was a great week. Mark Gordon, Governor of Wyoming, thank you for coming on. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Governor.
Wake Up Wyoming.